In the heart of a packed congressional hearing, Jasmine Crockett slid a sealed folder toward Donald Trump and asked one question that froze the entire chamber. Cameras caught his silent 63 seconds of political history hanging in the air. Was it fear? Strategy? Or the moment the truth finally caught up to him? Before we get to this explosive moment, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe truth still matters, hit subscribe. We've got another jaw-dropping story coming tomorrow. The hearing room was silent, except for the low hum of cameras and the scratch of pens from reporters crammed into the press row. Donald Trump sat at the witness table, his posture deliberately casual, but his fingers drummed an irregular beat against the polished wood. The overhead lights glared against the gold seal of the United States, making the chamber feel more like a stage than a committee room. Across from him, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett adjusted the microphone in front of her and reached for a thick manila folder. The bold, red confidential stamp across its cover caught the light, sending a ripple of whispers through the crowd. Crockett's expression didn't waver. She flipped the clasp, lifted a few pages, and then met Trump's eyes. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice even but firm, "I'm going to ask you to confirm the authenticity of this document, on the record." A wave of audible gasps broke the stillness. Trump's hands froze. He leaned back slightly in his chair, narrowing his eyes at her as though calculating his next move. The camera zoomed in, capturing every twitch in the room. From the Republican side of the dais, a voice shouted out, "Irrelevant!" The objection was sharp, rehearsed, an attempt to break the moment before it could land. On the Democratic side, murmurs rose, short, urgent words of encouragement. "Go ahead, Jasmine." Crockett didn't break eye contact. She slid the folder forward across the witness table, her fingertips releasing it with deliberate slowness. The movement felt choreographed, designed for both the room and the millions watching on television. Trump reached out, hesitated, then pulled the folder toward him. Donald Trump's reemergence in congressional hearings over the past year had been anything but quiet. Since leaving the White House, he had approached these appearances with the same showman's instincts that had propelled his political career, treating the hearing room as a stage, the witness table as his podium, and the cameras as his real audience. Each time he arrived with the air of someone who believed the venue and the moment could be bent to his will. Trump's record in these hearings was a study in aggressive counteroffensive. When faced with pointed questions, his default strategy had been to reject the premise outright, pivot to a counter-accusation, and then expand the conversation into unrelated territory where he could regain the advantage. This was not improvisation. It was a pattern honed over decades of press conferences, depositions, and political debates. If he couldn't win on the facts, he aimed to overwhelm the moment with volume, certainty, and unyielding confidence. As his team understood the choreography. The chair height was adjusted so he could lean forward without appearing hunched. The angle of the microphones was set to pick up even his muttered asides. He wore colors chosen to pop on camera, bright ties against dark suits, and his aides ensured the television feed always had him centered in the frame. In political hearings, his method was a hybrid of media strategy and street-level combat. He controlled the pace by interjecting before a question could be fully asked. He reframed difficult inquiries as partisan witch hunts. He sidestepped specifics with sweeping generalizations designed to rally his base. When the questions grew sharper, he often reached for the counter-narrative flood. This was his habit of firing off multiple unrelated claims in quick succession, forcing his opponent to either chase them all and lose momentum or ignore them and risk appearing evasive. For supporters, this looked like dominance. For critics, it was chaos by design. Over time, however, there had been cracks in the armor. In recent hearings, a handful of questioners had learned not to take the bait. They slowed their delivery, refused to interrupt themselves, and maintained their composure. In those moments, Trump's rhythm faltered, his bluster hanging in the air without the same impact. Still, he approached every new appearance convinced he could win the room. To him, hearings weren't about legal exposure. They were about controlling the narrative that emerged afterward. And in his mind, the only losing move was letting someone else set the terms of the conversation. That was the context in which he entered this hearing, expecting to dominate, not to be cornered. For Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, preparation was not a formality. It was her weapon. Long before the cameras rolled, she had mapped every possible line of attack and counterattack for this hearing. As a trial lawyer turned legislator, she had learned that in high-stakes settings, control came from readiness, not reaction. Her staff described the weeks leading up to this moment as a research sprint with no margin for error. The folder she carried today was the product of exhaustive authentication, triple-checking every date, signature, and reference against official sources. She refused to walk into a public confrontation with a document that could be challenged on technical grounds. The stakes were too high, and she knew Trump's allies would seize on any flaw, however small, to discredit her. Crockett's methodical style was rooted in her courtroom years. As a public defender and later a civil rights attorney, she had built a reputation for dismantling opposing witnesses, not through theatrics, but through precision questioning. She knew how to hold a pause until it became unbearable, how to drop a fact so cleanly that the other side walked straight into its implications before realizing they had no exit. For this hearing, her strategy was twofold: maintain composure under inevitable provocation, and land her point without giving her opponent room to spin out of it. She reviewed Trump's past appearances, noting every time he shifted topics, raised his voice, or tried to bait the questioner into an argument. For each tactic, she planned to counter short, grounded statements that would neither invite escalation nor appear evasive. The confidential folder was her linchpin. She had held back its existence from all but a few trusted aides, avoiding any leaks that could give Trump's team time to prepare. Every page inside had been vetted by legal counsel, cross-referenced with public records, and, where necessary, confirmed through private interviews with individuals connected to the matter. Her mindset was not about spectacle. She wasn't aiming for a viral moment at the expense of substance. But she understood that a single well-placed fact, delivered with control, could dominate the narrative far more effectively than a shouting match. In a political climate addicted to noise, she planned to cut through with clarity. She wasn't just ready for Trump's bluster. She was counting on it. The more he tried to dominate the exchange, the more obvious her contrast would become: calm, exact, and armed with receipts. And when the folder slid across that table, it would not be a gamble. It would be the final step in a plan she had been executing for weeks. Hearing began with the measured cadence of routine oversight. Jasmine Crockett, seated a few chairs down from the committee chair, adjusted her microphone and opened a tabbed binder thick with notes. Her tone at first was almost procedural, asking Donald Trump questions that fell squarely within the realm of standard ethics and disclosure. "Mr. Trump," she began, "in your post-presidency financial filings, are you prepared to affirm the completeness of all disclosures made regarding your business holdings?" Trump's response was immediate and practiced. He leaned into the mic, his voice carrying the same emphatic rhythm that had been a hallmark of his political rallies. "Absolutely complete, the best disclosures you've ever seen. More thorough than any president before me, I can promise you that. And by the way, a lot of people are saying that these questions are a waste of taxpayer dollars." Crockett didn't flinch. She followed up with another direct inquiry, this time about foreign financial engagements. Again, Trump launched into a polished answer, shifting to anecdotes about economic successes under his administration. The exchange was calm on the surface, but the undercurrent was moving toward deeper water. After a few more exchanges, Crockett adjusted her chair slightly forward. Her voice stayed even. "Mr. Trump, this committee also evaluates matters of personal integrity as they relate to public trust. I'd like to pivot to a question in that regard." The room stilled. The subject matter had shifted from procedural to personal. She glanced down at the manila folder resting beside her binder. "I have before me a document that may raise serious questions," she said, her tone deliberately neutral. She did not open it yet. Instead, she kept her hands folded over it, signaling patience rather than haste. Trump leaned back, narrowing his eyes. "Sounds like more fake news," he muttered into the mic. Crockett didn't take the bait. "Mr. Trump, I will give you the opportunity to address it directly. But first, I want to confirm for the record that you will answer my question when I present it, without evasion." The air in the chamber tightened. Members on both sides of the aisle shifted in their seats. Cameras zoomed in on her hand resting over the red-stamped folder. The early rhythm of the hearing had been replaced by a low hum of anticipation. Trump smirked, then straightened. "Go ahead," he said. "I've got nothing to hide." Crockett's eyes met his. "We'll see," she replied quietly, before turning a page in her notes and preparing to make the first reveal. Before Crockett could proceed, Trump's legal counsel, seated just behind him, leaned forward to speak into the mic. "Madam Chair, I must object to this line of questioning. It appears to be speculative in nature and potentially defamatory. We request that the document be reviewed in closed session before any public disclosure." Crockett didn't look away from Trump as she responded. "Counselor, this is a duly constituted congressional hearing. Our oversight authority extends to any matter bearing on the integrity of government officials, past or present. Your objection is noted and overruled." A ripple of murmurs ran through the room. The committee chair gave a curt nod, signaling Crockett to continue. She rested her hand again on the folder. "Mr. Trump, for the record, if the information in this document is false, you can say so now. You can deny it plainly and without reservation. Will you?" Trump shifted in his chair, adopting a posture that combined defiance with practiced composure. "I'll see what it says before I respond to something as ridiculous as this. You people have been after me for years. Russia, Ukraine, taxes. Now, you're inventing something else." Crockett remained unshaken. "This is not invention. This is documentation, authenticated through multiple sources, verified by legal counsel, and relevant to your testimony here today." Trump's allies on the committee began to raise their own objections. "This is a smear," one said. Another called it an abuse of process. But Crockett pressed on, her voice steady over the noise. "I remind all members that our duty here is not to shield witnesses from accountability, but to seek truth. Mr. Trump, I will read only one sentence from this document for the record. You will then have the opportunity to respond." Trump leaned forward. "Read it. Let's hear this so-called bombshell." Crockett opened the folder, careful to keep the contents turned toward her. She located the highlighted passage and placed her finger on the line. "Before I do," she said, "understand this. Once it is in the record, it cannot be erased. This is your moment to deny before you hear it." Trump shook his head with a short laugh. "Go ahead, I'm not afraid of your papers." She nodded once, then prepared to read. The room quieted, the side conversations dying down as members realized the exchange was reaching a tipping point. Even the photographers in the back of the chamber seemed to pause mid-frame, waiting for the words to land. Crockett looked directly at Trump and read aloud, her voice calm but clear enough to carry to the farthest row of seats. "The undersigned acknowledges and affirms that the child named herein is biologically connected to Donald J. Trump, with supporting documentation attached." The chamber fell into an unnatural stillness. No shuffling of papers, no whispered side comments, just a collective intake of breath that seemed to hang in the air. Trump didn't move for a full beat. His eyes locked on the folder in front of Crockett, his expression unreadable. Members of the committee glanced at one another, unsure of whether to break the silence. Cameras from every angle caught the same tableau, Crockett steady, Trump frozen, the document between them like an unspoken verdict. She didn't speak again. The strategy now was to let the moment stretch, to give the weight of the words room to settle over everyone in the chamber and beyond. 30 seconds passed. A cough from the far end of the room broke the tension momentarily, but Trump still hadn't said a word. At the 45-second mark, the chair shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the clock. Still, Crockett didn't press. Her training told her that silence could be more damning than any follow-up. By the 60th second, journalists in the gallery were already scribbling frantic notes. Social media feeds lit up as clips of the stunned room began circulating, some with captions reading simply, 63 seconds. Trump finally leaned forward, resting both hands on the table. "I have no idea what that is, or where it came from," he said, his voice lower now, stripped of the earlier bravado. "And I think this is a disgrace to this institution." Crockett's reply was measured. "The source and authentication process are documented, Mr. Trump. You are welcome to review them in detail, but the statement stands as read into the record." The silence that followed wasn't shock this time. It was recognition. Every person in that chamber understood the moment would not be confined to these walls. This was the clip, the headline, the pivot point of the entire hearing. Trump's counsel began whispering urgently in his ear, but the cameras stayed locked on his face. Crockett closed the folder slowly, signaling that, for now, the reveal was complete. Yet the room's energy made it clear the confrontation wasn't over. It had only changed form. By the time the hearing adjourned, the video clip had already escaped the walls of the Capitol. Within minutes, cable news control rooms were cutting it into 30-second loops, Crockett reading the single sentence, Trump sitting motionless, and the room holding its collective breath. Producers leaned hard into the visual symmetry, her steady gaze, his fixed stare, and in every broadcast, the silence itself became the headline. CNN rolled it on repeat with the banner 63 seconds of silence. MSNBC used a split-screen format, one side frozen on Crockett mid-sentence, the other locked on Trump's expressionless face. Fox News, despite efforts to frame the moment as Democrat theater, still couldn't avoid playing the clip in full during panel debates. The still frames became digital currency. On Twitter, the hashtags began climbing within the hour, 63 seconds. On the record, Crockett confirms. TikTok users created split-screen reaction videos, some mimicking Trump's frozen posture, others lip-syncing Crockett's words as if they were lines from a courtroom drama. The audio clip, just the single sentence followed by silence, was ripped and uploaded as a sound template, racking up millions. Ugh. Late-night hosts wasted no time. One quipped, 63 seconds is a long time in politics. It's also long enough to microwave a burrito, but tell any longer than it takes to answer a yes or no question. Another said, that wasn't silence. That was a political career buffering. Laughter filled the monologues, but behind the humor, even comedy audiences recognized the gravity of what had happened. Conservative talk radio tried to pivot the narrative. Hosts claimed it was a setup and an ambush, arguing that Crockett had used the hearing for personal political gain. But the visual power of the moment made those arguments feel thin. Listeners who tuned in out of curiosity often sought out the original clip afterward, and in many cases they found it unchanged from what they'd imagined, an unshakable presentation met by an uncharacteristic pause. Data analysts tracking the digital footprint noticed an unusual pattern. The moment crossed ideological lines faster than typical political content. Moderate conservative forums shared it, sometimes without commentary, sometimes with grudging respect. A prominent libertine influencer posted, "You can hate the messenger, but the discipline here is undeniable. That's how you land a hit without throwing a punch." Even Trump's own supporters found themselves split. Hardcore loyalists spit it entirely, while a surprising number admitted that the optics weren't good. "He should have said something, anything," one wrote in a private Facebook group. Another replied, "Yeah, but if he talks, it's in the record forever." Maybe the silence was the smart move. The saturation was total. YouTube compilations labeled every angle of the Crockett-Trump freeze appeared within hours, some intercutting the chamber footage with slow-motion replays and heartbeat sound effects. Independent creators posted breakdowns of body language, analyzing every micro-expression. A former FBI negotiator went viral with a 6-minute commentary explaining the psychological impact of controlled silence in high-stakes confrontations. The result was unmistakable. Whatever else people thought about the hearing, Crockett's exchange with Trump had detonated far beyond the hearing room. The clip wasn't just being watched. It was being studied, dissected, and reinterpreted across every medium imaginable. As the media cycle stretched into its second day, the nation's response fractured into distinct camps. Trump's allies in Congress flooded cable news and social media with statements labeling the moment a cheap stunt. They argued that Crockett had abandoned legitimate policy oversight in favor of creating a viral soundbite. Representative Mark Reynolds called it a disgraceful misuse of committee time and accused her of weaponizing unverified personal allegations. But for others, the hearing was nothing short of historic. Editorial boards at major newspapers weighed in with sharply differing takes. The Washington Post ran the headline, "63 Seconds That May Redefined Congressional Oversight." In contrast, the Wall Street Journal's editorial page asked, "Did Crockett cross the line?" The New York Times published a think piece exploring the role of public accountability in democratic institutions, framing the exchange as a modern example of congressional courage under pressure. On talk shows, the debate raged over whether Crockett's move was an act of duty or political theater. One prominent political analyst argued, "This was congressional oversight in its purest form, direct, documented, and on the record." Another countered, "Once you open the door to this kind of personal confrontation, you risk undermining the credibility of the institution." Pollsters jumped on the moment, releasing snap surveys that showed a deep divide. Among Democrats, approval of Crockett's handling of the exchange was overwhelming, with many citing her calm demeanor as proof of her capability under pressure. Among Republicans, opinions skewed sharply negative, though a small but notable minority expressed admiration for her composure, even if they disliked the content of her revelation. Independents split almost evenly, suggesting that the clip had struck a nerve across political lines. On social media, the argument played out in real time. Supporters posted side-by-side videos comparing Crockett's delivery to famous moments in congressional history, from Watergate to Iran. Detractors spliced her exchange into montages of what they called Democrat grandstanding. Memes reflected the divide. One popular image showed Crockett with the caption, "With the art of the pause." Outside the digital sphere, public spaces became battlegrounds for interpretation. In coffee shops, barbershops, and college campuses, the 63-second silence was a conversation starter. Some viewed it as the ultimate mic drop. Others called it a distraction from pressing policy debates. Meanwhile, Crockett herself remained largely silent outside of official channels. She issued a single statement to the press. "My responsibility is to the truth, the record, and the American people. That's where I'll leave it." The brevity only fueled speculation about her next move. What no one could dispute was the magnitude of the cultural moment. Whether praised as a principled stand or condemned as a partisan hit, the confrontation had forced the country into a rare moment of collective attention, and in a political era defined by short news cycles, that kind of sustained focus was its own kind of power. Inside the Capitol, the fallout took on a more procedural and, in some ways, more consequential form. Within 48 hours, several lawmakers from both parties began quietly pushing for a closed-door review of the document Crockett had introduced. While public debate focused on the optics, the institutional gears were turning toward potential next steps. The committee's ranking member requested a formal review process, citing the need to verify every claim before considering any legislative or legal action. "If the document is as significant as it appears, we have an obligation to confirm its authenticity in detail," he told reporters. That statement was careful, but it signaled acknowledgement that the matter could not simply be dismissed. Meanwhile, independent journalists filed a flurry of Freedom of Information Act requests, aimed at uncovering the source material and any related correspondence. Several nonprofit investigative outlets announced joint projects to trace the chain of custody for the document. For them, the story was no longer just about the hearing. It was about the paper trail, the authentication process, and the implications if the claims proved true. Legal analysts began debating the potential consequences in televised segments and op-eds. If the document's contents were verified, it could have implications not only for Trump's public image, but also for his legal standing in ongoing cases. If it was somehow discredited, questions would shift toward how it entered the congressional record in the first place. In the background, committee staffers were inundated with inquiries from advocacy groups, think tanks, and even foreign correspondents wanting clarification on next steps. The hearing's viral moment had created a diplomatic ripple, with international media framing it as evidence of America's increasingly combative political culture. Crockett, for her part, signaled a willingness to participate in any closed-door review, but reiterated her position that the information had been vetted before she brought it forward. Due diligence was done, she told a local Texas outlet. "I'm not in the business of making unsubstantiated claims. I'm in the business of oversight." Trump's camp issued a statement dismissing the entire matter as politically motivated fiction. and calling for the committee to censure Crockett. Behind the scenes, however, multiple reports indicated that his legal team was quietly reviewing their own strategy in light of how the silence had been perceived by the public. The most telling sign of the moment's institutional weight came when a senior member of the committee, someone known for avoiding the spotlight, remarked to a reporter off the record, "This won't blow over. It's already changed the way people think about what happens in that room." By the end of the week, the viral clip had not only shaped public opinion, but also set into motion a series of formal processes that could extend for months. In Washington, that kind of endurance was rare, and it was a testament to how a single, disciplined exchange could reverberate through every layer of the political and legal system. By the third day after the hearing, the 63-second freeze had escaped the confines of political media and fully entered pop culture. It was no longer just a congressional exchange, it had become a visual language of its own. Memes flooded Instagram and Twitter, pairing the still shot of Trump's frozen face with captions like, "When the Wi-Fi drops mid-argument," or "Buffering, please wait." Others took a more pointed political tone, superimposing Crockett's calm expression with the words, "Oversight means overpower." Street artists joined in. In downtown Los Angeles, a mural appeared almost overnight, Crockett on one side, seated, folder in hand, eyes locked forward. Trump opposite her, leaning back in his chair. Between them, in bold red letters, the phrase, "On the record," stretched across the wall. In Brooklyn, a stencil artist painted dozens of small, minimalist outlines of the moment on brick walls and subway stations, turning the confrontation into an urban motif. TikTok creators turned the clip into a template for creative remixes. Some used the original audio, layering it over scenes of everyday standoffs. Teachers confronting late homework submissions, roommates revealing messy kitchens, even parents waiting silently for their kids to confess to minor mischief. Others stripped away the original sound, replacing the silence with comedic audio tracks or dramatic movie scores, amplifying the tension in absurd ways. Educators found unexpected value in the moment. High school civics teachers began incorporating the clip into lessons about congressional oversight and the balance of powers. "This is how you see separation of powers in action," one teacher told a local paper. Law professors assigned it in courses on evidence, using Crockett's controlled questioning as a case study in maintaining composure during adversarial proceedings. The clip also resonated deeply with activists. Advocacy groups for government transparency, whistleblower protection, and investigative journalism used the footage in promotional materials, highlighting it as a model for holding powerful figures accountable without losing control of the room. In one viral tweet, a journalist wrote, "This is what it looks like when the facts are ready, and the witness isn't." By now, the 63-second silence had transcended its original political context. It became shorthand for moments when calm authority prevailed over bluster, a cultural touchstone that could be referenced without explanation. In a digital age where attention spans are measured in seconds, this 1-minute-plus pause had somehow managed to hold. While the cultural wave surged, the political machinery shifted into high gear. Within a week of the hearing, the House Oversight Committee announced it would schedule a special session to address unresolved matters stemming from Crockett's questioning. The language was deliberately neutral, but insiders knew the session would center on the document she had introduced and Trump's non-response. Behind the scenes, committee staffers were working around the clock to prepare briefing materials. Both Democratic and Republican members requested deeper dives into the document's chain of custody, the process by which it had been authenticated, and any corroborating evidence that might exist. The closed-door briefings promised to be tense, with competing factions ready to challenge or defend every aspect of Crockett's move. Pollsters tracking the fallout saw a clear trend. Public opinion on transparency in government was shifting. A national poll found that 61% of respondents juged compelled to respond directly to evidence presented in hearings, even if it touched on personalism. Among independents, that number rose to nearly 70%. The findings suggested that the hearing had not only captured attention, but also moved sentiment in favor of stronger oversight powers. For Trump, the consequences were more complicated. His core base remained loyal, dismissing the moment as irrelevant or media theater. But among persuadable voters, particularly suburban moderates, the optics of his prolonged silence raised questions. Political strategists in both parties noted the potential impact in swing districts, where narratives about accountability often hold sway. Crockett's profile, meanwhile, skyrocketed. She received invitations to appear on every major Sunday political show, though she accepted only one, maintaining her strategy of letting the moment speak for itself. Her campaign saw a surge in small-dollar donations, many accompanied by notes referencing the hearing. One read simply, "For the folder." Even within the Republican caucus, there were quiet rumblings. A few members expressed concern that Trump's handling of the exchange had been politically damaging. One senior Republican, speaking anonymously, told a reporter, "You can't go silent for that long and expect it to play well outside the base. People notice." By the time the Oversight Committee's special session date was set, it was clear that the political impact of those 63 seconds would not fade quickly. The hearing had triggered not just a viral sensation, but a recalibration of how congressional confrontations were viewed and how their consequences could ripple into electoral politics. Jasmine Crockett's statement landed the morning after the Oversight Committee announced its special session. It was short, deliberate, and impossible to misinterpret. "Every American deserves truth, no matter how powerful the person being asked," it began. No excess language, no dramatic flourish, just a reaffirmation of the principle that had guided her through the hearing. She didn't name Donald Trump. She didn't need to. The entire country knew who she meant. In that single line, Crockett reframed the event from a political clash into a question of national values. The confrontation wasn't about partisanship, or even about one document. It was about the right of the public to demand straight answers from those who hold power. It was about reminding Americans that oversight is not theater. It is a constitutional obligation. Her words resonated beyond the usual political circles. Community leaders began quoting the statement at town halls. Civic organizations shared it in newsletters, urging citizens to stay informed about the upcoming special session. College students printed the quote on flyers and posted them across campuses, next to QR codes linking to the full hearing video. Crockett's choice to keep her statement measured rather than triumphant was strategic. In interviews, political analysts noted that she avoided the victory lap trap that often alienates undecided voters. Instead, she placed the emphasis on collective responsibility. "She's making it about the people, not about herself," one content observed on a primetime panel. That's why it's landing the way it is. The call to action that followed her statement was equally straightforward. She urged Americans to watch the upcoming hearings, to read the documents when they became public, and to engage with their representatives about what they saw. "Democracy isn't a spectator sport," she wrote. "It only works when we show up." Those words sparked a surge in civic engagement. Voter registration groups reported an uptick in sign-ups in multiple states. Public forums hosted by local representatives saw higher attendance. Even in communities far removed from Washington, the message had taken root. Accountability requires participation. For Crockett, the mission was not to turn a viral moment into personal fame, but to convert it into sustained attention on the process. She understood that the 63 seconds of silence had given the country a rare, shared experience, something people could point to as evidence that even the most powerful could be held in check. Her challenge now was to ensure it didn't fade into the churn of the news cycle. As the special session approached, her closing message remained clear. This was not about scoring points. It was about defending the principle that truth is not optional in a democracy. Whether you were a staunch supporter, a critic, or somewhere in between, the invitation was the same. Show up, pay attention, and hold every leader to the same standard. That was, in her words, how the American experiment survives